Welcome back. It's time for business. Now we're going to start off with Barclays Banco, and it's struggling to contain a scandal over rate fixing.
That's right, Claire. In about 20 minutes or so, maybe even less than that, we're going to find out whether Barclays has decided to offer up a sacrificial lamb for a rate fixing scandal for which it's already been fined around 300 million euros. It's due to make a statement on the future of its chairman. It's been widely reported over the weekend that the chairman of Barclays will step down as a result of this scandal. There have been lots of calls for heads to roll over this, and this scandal has now gone right to the top of the UK government, where there are calls for a public inquiry. Katerina Vitozzi has more details for us.
A rate-fixing scandal that's destroyed faith in the UK banking industry. Last week, Barclays was found guilty of trying to manipulate an interbank lending rate in their favour. Now, 3 other banks are also being probed: Citigroup, UBS and the Royal Bank of Scotland.
It is clear that what happened in Barclays and potentially other banks was completely unacceptable, was systematic of a financial system that elevated greed above all other concerns and brought our economy to its knees.
4 RBS traders have already been sacked over their alleged involvement in trying to fix what's called LIBOR, an interest rate meant to be the bank's honest appraisal of what it costs them to lend money to each other. It's a daily benchmark for pricing many financial transactions, not only for loans between banks, but homes and business mortgages, rates of return for private investors lending money to banks, and for high-stakes derivative deals. The admission that some bankers try to fix it for their own gain has shaken the industry.
What I hope is that everyone now understands that something went very wrong with the UK banking industry, and we need to put it right.
The UK government is considering criminal investigations into bankers found guilty of trying to fix the interest rate. An independent parliamentary review's also been opened that'll call top bank executives in for questioning. In addition, the British financial watchdog wants tougher laws to penalise banks with if they're found guilty of malpractice.
Now, Owen, since that scandal broke, Barclays has lost nearly 20% of its market value, but generally the markets are looking a little bit brighter.
Yeah, and of course we'll get a good idea of what investors think about Barclays when the European markets open just after 9 Paris time, Claire. The Asian markets, as you say, had a pretty good start to the week. The Hang Seng really flying out of the blocks, more than 2% up going into the afternoon trading session. In fact, it had a pretty good June as well, closing the month around 3% up, as did the Nikkei, but you can see the Nikkei just trading a little bit shy of the Hang Seng, around 0.2% up or so. While we're talking markets as well, worth keeping an eye on oil prices today. Today is the first day's trading on oil markets since US and EU sanctions were enforced against Iran over its nuclear development program. Remember, these have been months in the coming. Iran was warned months ago that these would come into force. They have come into force. It means that essentially much of Iran's oil supply to the West has been cut off. It's estimated that Iran will lose around a quarter of its supply to the West as a result of this. That has had an impact, as you might expect, on crude futures, particularly the price of crude in Europe on markets trading Brent oil. Now, it's true to say crude has been going down over the last few months. You might remember it was up at around $125 a barrel just a few months ago. It's come down pretty sharply. But despite that, once those sanctions were announced and in the run-up to them coming into force, we've seen quite a big spike, around 6% up, taking Brent crude up to around $97 a barrel.
OK, let's get some company news now. Apple has paid $60 million to settle a legal battle over the iPad trademark. The Californian firm had been sued by Hong Kong-based ProView Technology, whose owner claimed he'd registered the name iPad as early as 2000 when he was developing a similar tablet. The ensuing lawsuit had hampered some sales after Chinese authorities had ordered retailers to remove Apple's iPad.
And Fiat's truck-making subsidiary Iveco is closing 5 European plants with the loss of nearly 1,100 jobs. The closures announced by the Italian manufacturer will hit factories in France, Austria and Germany. It's the latest shake-up for the firm, whose primary stock market listing has been moved to New York following the merger with US partner CNH.
Now, it's a busy week for number crunchers here in France. President François Hollande getting stuck into his country's finances. There are growing fears, though, that France will be next in this Euro domino effect.
Absolutely, and that's been the case for some time before François Hollande was elected president. France was dragged once or twice into this debt storm. Just to take you through some of these numbers, Claire, it's going to be, as you say, a fairly heavy week on the number front for François Hollande and his new team as they crack into that budget. We've got public debt in France, which is nearly 90% of GDP. It's not the biggest in the Eurozone, but it's quite high for a leading European country when you compare it with a country like Italy with public debt of 120%. We know the story of Italy, of course, right in the eye of this debt storm. The markets are really eating away at this country's economy. Now, the idea under Hollande's presidency is to bring this deficit down to 3% of GDP by next year and wipe out the deficit completely, so no deficit by 2017. They've held themselves hostage to this a little bit, not just Hollande, but President Sarkozy before him, by making these very public declarations that they would get the country's finances in order to meet these new EU regulations. Now, we're going to get an audit office report out a little later this morning. Essentially, it's going to tell the government that it needs to find up to 10 billion euros of savings over the next year or so. And I put in there the French long-term borrowing costs when we talk about these debt yields that we see for countries like Spain and Italy. They're astronomically high. Well, okay, they're not that high for a country like France. Around 2.7% isn't anything to really worry about. But that's getting on for nearly double the borrowing costs of Germany. When you compare these two economies, you can see that France is really out of kilter with Germany.
Okay, then. So how does François Hollande plan to balance the books?
Well, of course, he had big declarations on the campaign trail about taxing the rich, bringing in that 75% top rate of tax to tax the wealthiest in France. That's going to contribute something to the coffers. We don't really know how much exactly that is going to contribute. Also, a tax on financial transactions as well. So Hollande really sort of cracking down on what he sees as irresponsible capitalism. There's also going to be a freeze on public spending over the next year or so. But remember, at the same time, Hollande wants to employ around 65,000 new civil servants. So he's really got a balancing act to do to try and make these cuts and try and bring this deficit down. He's going to give more details of that through the week as he addresses Parliament.
All right, thank you very much, Owen. Thank you for watching France 24. Stay tuned. Stuart Norval will have all the latest headlines in just a few minutes' time.